The views and content expressed on the Pop Culture Courtroom are provided solely for educational and entertainment purposes and do not constitute legal advice. For any legal matters, please consult with a licensed attorney.
Welcome back to the Pop Culture Courtroom. I'm William Mayfield.
And I'm Matt Hardin.
And today we're going to start a little bit of a series on the Harry Potter books and movies. And we're going to start where it all began with book one, or movie one, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
If you are worried about spoilers, you probably should have seen this by now or read these books. So this may not be the right podcast for you. We're going to try to have a little bit of fun with this today. I want to say, first of all, J.K. Rowling, this is a monumental achievement. The world building in these books is remarkable. Anyways, in book one of the Harry Potter book, the kind of central injury, and we look at injuries in these different pop culture things and see whether or not there's court case with them. The first one that we get to is the death of Harry Potter's parents at the hands of Voldemort, and the scar that he gets from the rebounding of Avada Kedavra curse that ends up causing him injuries for years and years.
Yeah, it's really the theme of the books throughout. I think Voldemort, or He Who Must Not Be Named, appears in every book besides the third, and he's still involved in the third. It's not a direct appearance. But in general, if you were to sum up Harry Potter, it's a battle between the boy who lived and the dark wizard who's trying to essentially take over the world.
And those that are trying to help the side of good and the side of evil and the conflicts between those. So in these books, there are many, many different injuries and potential deaths that can be dealt with. I think probably first, it'd be interesting to look at, are there lawyers in this world? There are. Throughout the different series, there's a criminal magical enforcement aspect of the Ministry of Magic we hear about. We have times during these books where Harry Potter himself is put in front of the wizard committee to see whether or not he's going to be able to keep his wand or return back to school. And so are there lawyers in this world? Well, there does appear to be.
Absolutely. And a theme of this book, as is the case in many films and books throughout history, is there is some corruption. It's J.K. Rowling doesn't really try to hide who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. There's trials that have results that are certainly unjust. One thing that always struck me about these books was, while the government stuff is probably fairly similar to Muggle life, that's what they call non-magical people in Harry Potter, is Muggles. I don't know how these kids learned how to speak English or do math or or do science. Maybe science is magic. Maybe we'll let them slide for science. But how did they learn how to speak? And because all their classes are basically like either learning how to fly a broom or how to turn a frog into a different type of frog.
Well, and Harry Potter, I believe, is 11 when he goes to Hogwarts for his first year. You know, he's been in an English school up until that point, learning a lot of those things. What are these magic kids doing up until the age of 10 or 11? I mean, I've got a 10-year-old at my house. That's fourth grade. I mean, your knowledge at fourth grade is a lot more than it'd be going into kindergarten. But have these kids done anything like that? Are they assimilating into the English side schools or worldwide, since there's magic schools everywhere?
I think that's a good question, and it's just really not addressed. Hermione already loves books by the time she gets there her first year, so presumably she knows how to read. She knows how to read well.
Her parents are dentists, so they probably, and she's a muggle by birth. So I think the muggles are separate from the magic folk. Harry is magic by birth, but he didn't have any idea he was magic until, Hagrid tells him that, trying to get him his Hogwarts acceptance letter over and over in the first book.
So the Weasleys are, and Ron Weasley is Harry's best friend in the book, and his family is a big magical family. There's 6 or 7 of them. All of them somehow know how to read, and I don't know much about their math skills, but I know they can count based on some things in the book. So that part she doesn't really leave answered, but she does do a good job of making it clear that there is government and that the government sometimes functions well and sometimes functions with corruption.
Yeah, and the Weasleys did have 7 children, the one girl and the 6 boys, and they're all going to Hogwarts. It's never really clear what it costs to go to Hogwarts. People just get accepted there and they go, and I can't imagine how the I mean, what is a Muggle dentist paying for Hermione to go there? I don't really know, but it's one of those things that probably doesn't matter, that you and I have spent a lot of time obsessing about details in the magical world and what makes sense in this place. And to be fair, there's lots that you probably just have to accept, that because we're lawyers and we think about the minutia of things, that maybe we're not the best people to accept.
Absolutely. There's a lot of rabbit holes there. I mean, Harry inherits his parents' fortune, but you barely ever see him spend any money in the entire series. And in fact, to an extent, other than like his broomstick, he gets multiple broomsticks over the series, and he's given them by multiple different people. A lot of the things that we pay for in the Muggle world can actually be done with magic that you wouldn't need to pay for in that world. So the value of money is probably a little different in that.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. I've never understood the whole the Weasley family being impoverished when they have magical abilities to create things out of thin air. You know, we have the only economic investment type system appears to be putting money in a goblin bank, and we don't really know what their investment strategies are. They appear to loan money to people, because that comes up throughout the series, where they're, you know, collecting loans. But the main commerce appears to be government jobs, you know, via either the Ministry of Magic mostly, or working for schools like Hogwarts, or owning a shop. And it's really interesting as they get later in these books, when they're trying to think about what they want to do, and almost all of them want to go do government jobs, or, you know, do what Ron's two brothers, the twins, do, where they open up the joke shop. So you got to go to the government, or you got to go open up a store, and that's about it.
So the world operates. She's trying to mix our world with her world, and she does a really, really good job. But as is the case with anything that's science fiction, and this is undoubtedly some version of science fiction,
I think it's more fantasy.
The rules sometimes get a little foggy. But in this particular instance that you talked about earlier, where Harry's parents were murdered and he was left with a scar that affected him negatively for the rest of his life, that's not as murky. That's something where Harry suffered significant damages as a result of being wronged by someone, in this case Voldemort, and there certainly should be, and in my opinion is, a remedy for him.
Essentially, as we find out throughout the series, that the person who's going to be marked as Harry's equal is born in a particular month, and in that particular month it was going to be him or Neville Longbottom. And ultimately Voldemort decides that to go after Harry. There's a betrayal of Harry's parents by their secret keeper, Wormtail, or Peter Pettigrew, tells Voldemort. He goes to their home in Godric's Hollow and goes and murders his parents, during which point Harry's mother sacrifices herself to save her son. Harry is then taken using Sirius Black's motorcycle, and Hagrid takes him to Privet Lane, where he meets Professor McGonagall and Dumbledore essentially leaves Harry with a note pinned on him to go live with the Dursleys. The Dursleys then spend Harry's entire childhood telling him his parents died in a car crash. And as many of you know, we do a lot of car crashes and personal injury work in our business, and that's an interesting story. And he doesn't find out that's not what happened until his 11th birthday, when Hagrid tells him. So breaking it down, the Avada Kedavra curse, there's really not any known way to keep that from happening. You know, I think nearly everyone else that has that, or pretty much all people that have that in the rest of this book series, that curse gets used, the people die. Harry manages to survive it multiple times at the hands of Voldemort for various reasons. But in his mother's sacrifice and saving his life, it does create a bond between Harry, where this curse scar actually causes him regular problems. You know, he can sense when Voldemort's angry. He can tell where there's problems going on in the world from it, and he has this connection with him the rest of the book, including gets the ability to be able to speak parcel-tongue to snakes from it. So in looking at the actual mechanism of injury, you have an intentional act done in concert with at least one other person, Peter Pettigrew. So those folks would be liable for the deaths of his parents and for the injuries and the resultant damages from the problems with the scar that Harry has over the next years and years. I think where we might get into a little bit of problem is starting a lawsuit in Tennessee and other states. You type out what happened, you know, the facts, the allegations, the damages, why it was negligent or deliberate. And then you have to serve that lawsuit upon the people. So if you start with Peter Pettigrew, for example, Peter Pettigrew spends the next 11 years disguised as the animagus as the rat Scabbers living in Ron's house. We going to be able to serve Scabbers, you think?
I think the big problem there is that people didn't discover that Scabbers was Peter Pettigrew until book 3, so they wouldn't have known to serve him.
Right,
and the question of whether or not serving Scabbers would qualify to serve Peter Pettigrew is a difficult one, because is Scabbers actually Peter Pettigrew? Is he competent to receive the service? That it's not a problem that we've contemplated in our real life, because that doesn't happen in real life. But that would be a tough issue.
He's a sentient rat. I mean, and he can switch back and forth as an animagus without even having a wand. I mean, it's impressive that you could even do that. I suspect if magical laws, if such things exist, say that if you're, as an animagus, you're responsible for what you are as a human as well, as probably what would tie that together.
I do think getting Voldemort served would be very difficult. He is the most notorious criminal in the history of the magical world, at least that we know about. And he spends the better part of the books out doing things in the open, but he's not in Azkaban. So the criminal authorities and the government has not been able to capture him and put him in Azkaban. So sending a magical service processor, maybe it's owls in this world. But I don't know how they're going to track down Voldemort if all the powers of the government and the Ministry of Magic are trying to track him down and they can't. I don't know how Hootie the process server is going to be able to track him down.
Well, these owls are really smart. They can sense where people are and things like that. I think they have extra powers than just regular old owls. But, I mean, coming back to what you were saying a minute ago, I mean, Peter Pettigrew faked his own death after this. They pinned it on Sirius Black and put him in Azkaban, so they thought they had caught the person. So, this lawsuit potentially could have started against Sirius Black, who definitely has assets. He has his house, he's got his gold, which, after he dies, he leaves to Harry as well. So there were assets to go after, and if it works similar to the human world, there probably already would have been a lawsuit against Sirius Black.
So something interesting. Harry didn't realize from the time he was a young boy until he was 11 that any of this happened. We have a statute of limitations problem there, right?
In our state, we would.
Well,
however,
that's what I wanted to get to.
Sirius Black has been convicted of a crime, and if you're convicted of a crime, it would extend the statute of limitations in the state of Tennessee, at least, and
how old
and in
is
some
Harry?
Other states. Harry's claim would be different than his parents' claim. So the death of his parents would be extended based on what the conviction to Sirius is, but then you'd have a civil judgment against somebody who didn't really do it. So that's probably going to get undone about book 3 at some level, but he's in prison. I don't know how much Sirius would really contest that. We don't really know in the wizarding world whether there's liability insurance or umbrella policies and that type of thing, but who knows?
I think another thing to talk about here, and it's something that sometimes people who haven't dealt in the legal world a lot don't know the difference, is the difference in criminal law and civil law. Voldemort obviously is a murderer. He uses a Avada Kedavra curse not just on Harry's parents, but a lot of different people.
But nobody really thinks he's alive during this time period. I mean, there's a few people like maybe Dumbledore that thinks he's got a spirit out there. I mean, we don't find out about him splitting his soul into the Horcruxes until much, much later. I mean, that's almost toward the end of the series. So they think he's dead, or most of the world thinks he's dead. So, I mean, the criminal thing, and this comes back to our service issue you brought up a minute ago, which was, even in book 1, which is what we're mostly talking about here today, no one knows that Voldemort has any type of physical form until the end, when Professor Quirrell takes his turban off that he's been wearing the entire movie and in the book, and you find out that Voldemort's head is attached to the side of his head like a lamprey or something.
So let's say, for the sake of argument, that they did capture Voldemort and they did convict him of murdering Harry's parents, and he went to Azkaban for that. Would that automatically trigger him owing Harry a bunch of money, or would there have to be a separate civil trial?
Well, I'd say first that the Dementors are the natural allies of the dark side in this book, including Voldemort. So I doubt he would be kept in Azkaban for very long. As far as the criminal aspect of it, I mean, Voldemort definitely, he's be responsible for this murder. Would a wizard jury hold him responsible? I think so. And then the separate civil thing, the civil is something for damages. Criminal is to punish one way or another, like fine or serving time in jail, that type of thing. The civil side is what we think of as awarding damages for whatever the person did, which can be, it's criminal. It's not always, car wreck or something like that. It may not be criminal at all. It can be if there's a DUI or excessive speed or something. So you may have both types of cases like you would here.
Absolutely. And I think one of the most famous instances of that is the O.J. Simpson case, where he was not convicted of murder, but he did have to pay damages to Nicole Simpson Brown's family on the civil side of things.
I agree. Let's come back to something I don't think we finished talking about, which is the parents' claims versus Harry's claim. So at least in Tennessee, the wrongful death claim is going to be 1 year from the date of the death, with maybe some extension as it relates to the criminal portion of this, if there was some corporeal form of Voldemort that you could put in Azkaban, or Peter Pettigrew had not faked his death. So that could extend the statute of limitations. Harry, being a minor, he would inherit the wrongful death claims of his parents, but it's still their claim. He would just be probably the named beneficiary of it. As to his own claims, he would have till age 18 plus a year in Tennessee related to his scar claims. And so as we get later in the books, what does Voldemort have that you could potentially take from him? Well, we know he's got these priceless heirlooms from the 4 heads of houses from Hogwarts, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, Slytherin, and Gryffindor, that he makes Horcruxes into one way or another. I think with the exception of the sword, he has all 3. The sword of Gryffindor, I think he has the other 3 in his possession and then hides them.
Of course, one thing to think about that gets really messy is Harry's not the only person with a good, valid claim against Voldemort.
He murders people left and right.
So the asset pool and the division of assets and comparing cases would get really murky. However, I think there could be significant statute issues, because I think he's probably one of the only minor children that was involved in one of those murders. So it would be pretty messy in terms of the division of those assets. I don't know if you can sell the Sword of Gryffindor. I don't know if it's like in our world where people buy like Barry Bonds baseball that he broke a record with, or if it's like a protected natural artifact that goes in some museum. All those questions would have to be answered.
I mean, I think it's what you can buy on Nocturne Alley, or you can buy in Diagon Alley at those shops they have there.
What do you think the magical version of eBay is?
It's funny because they can do all these advanced things that are sometimes lesser than what the technology of our real world can do. Owls being a very prominent version of that.
I know
it's fun, but
I know that we're going to get into this later, but my least favorite part of the entire Harry Potter series is that they reveal that they have the ability to do a bit of time travel. And instead of use it to solve all of these horrible problems that they have, they use it so Hermione can go to more school. And she's probably the person in the series that least needs more schooling.
They also use it to save Buckbeak's life later.
And they save
hippogriff.
They use it to save one animal's lives instead of... And listen, I love animals. I do.
Well, let's be fair about that. Because they saved that animal, he then saves Sirius Black. Because Sirius flies off when they're about to execute him with the Dementors in that book.
I still think they could get more legs out of the time turner.
And I'm a little disturbed that you're just worried about the hippogriff and you forget about Harry's godfather that gets saved because of that. But okay.
Well, Harry's godfather didn't last very long.
Well, poor Harry gets the downside of things quite a bit. I mean, anything he loves is killed, with the exception of maybe his 2 close friends and his future wife.
So, in this case, let's say that we're having a hard time tracking down Voldemort. We don't know that Wormtail is that Peter Pettigrew. So we think both of them are either dead, or we can't track either one of them down. Is there any remedy?
Can't get them served, you're going to be in big trouble.
Absolutely. We know there's a case in evaluating how we go about this. We know that if you can get Voldemort served or Peter Pettigrew served, that you have a really valid claim against them. But we think we've got some pretty big troubles if we can't pull that off.
However, there's probably some kind of government tort liability claim in here as well. I mean, the timing on that one would be a concern. In Tennessee, it's limited as well on the time period, and the government gets really, really involved with covering up the return of Voldemort and controlling what's going on at Hogwarts much later, to Harry's great detriment, which we'll talk about in some of these later episodes.
Do you think that they would have had a potential claim at the point that Harry's parents were killed? It was abundantly clear that Voldemort was a danger to the society, do you think that they would have had a claim for not properly protecting society from Voldemort?
I don't know. We're starting to stretch. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't think that'd be just Harry. I mean, we talk about, when Cedric Diggory's killed later, all these people float out of it that he's just murdered in the most recent times, let alone all the people that he murdered on his rise to power, which were tons of wizards that were fighting against him, people that were Muggle-born wizards. They have that whole trying to exterminate people that were Muggle-born, whether they're good at magic or not, which is an underlying theme of it. So, I mean, who knows how many people he's killed that would have those. I mean, it's a good case that's going to have, Harry has arguably the strongest claim given his ongoing issues. But I mean, even somebody like Neville Longbottom. I mean, Neville Longbottom's parents were tortured into insanity, and they then go to St. Mungo's for the rest of their lives where they're having to be cared for. And I mean, it's often in these claims, the cases where somebody has a long-term injury that requires vast amounts of medical care, those end up having more value than someone who's been killed. So, I mean, if anything, Neville's claims through Neville and his grandmother are probably stronger than Harry's.
And I will say, as someone who's been involved in some cases that unfortunately involved deaths before, while it is an immensely rewarding part of our job to help people who've been through difficult things like that, I've never had a case where material things were ever able to fully make up for something like that happening. And in this event, Harry has all of his parents' money, but as you can tell throughout the series, he would give it all up just to have his parents back.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's put in his aunt and uncle's house with a place that there's no love for him, and that's, colors his entire life. I mean, this first book, the sense of family, or him finding a surrogate family through his friends and relationships, is what helps him grow and come into his own as a young wizard. Frankly, it's largely the themes of the books is, finding your community and in a place where you belong in a positive manner, and that's something that people should be willing to fight to preserve. And that's, I think, to me, the theme of all these books. Harry finding love and putting the rest of the world above himself. So, I mean, that's the important lesson here. But looking at this from a civil money standpoint, I mean, that's pales in comparison to these relationships that he's lost.
Absolutely.
So there are multiple injuries throughout this first book that we can talk about. And as the books go on, there's more and more injuries and deaths the later you get into the series. So as Harry has now reached Hogwarts, we begin to see a series of injuries that happen to Harry, his friends, other people in this world, that often seem like they could have been prevented with very, very minor magic, or even the most basic of precautions taken by the good professors of Hogwarts. So in book one, Madam Hooch has gone in and is going to teach Harry's Gryffindor group and the Slytherin group, Malfoy and his crew, their first flying lesson. So they all have some of the school brooms out there. They're out in, I guess, what you call the quad. And we've set a scene up where they all have their own brooms. And essentially, the only training they've basically gotten is basically to kick off the ground and hover a few feet. So what do you think about that? If we taken any precautions here?
No, we certainly haven't. One of the things that strikes me about this scene is how similar some of it is to the way we analyze law in the Muggle world, and how different some of it is to how the case would be in the Muggle world. So this part is similar. It's a situation where they're being taught how to fly, but they've been taught virtually nothing. She tells them to say up for the broom, and the broom comes to their hand, and then she tells them to mount the broom. And Neville mounts the broom and somehow gets shot way up high into the air at a spot where if he fell from would cause a significant injury, potentially death.
A little different, I think, in the books. I mean, as I remember it, she gives a little more instruction and tells them to kick off lightly. Neville, being a pretty nervous, agitated kind of chap, kicks off hard, and he ends up going, about 15 feet in the air, I think, in the book. And then they, there are differences between the movies and the books for those of y'all that have read both of them. And it's probably a little more exciting to see on the screen Neville go way up high and catch himself on the spear or whatever coming down.
The movie dramatized it quite a bit. The broom's flying around, hitting against the Hogwarts building, and then he falls off the broom at a really high spot, and his cape hooks onto a light fixture and then it hooks on another one, and somehow he hits the ground and is okay. But it's very clear from the scene that he could have died from this incident. And the reality is there were no precautions, there were no nets set up for these kids who were flying for the first time. It felt unorganized, and it felt kind of willy-nilly for something that was so dangerous.
It seems like there's 100 things they could have just magicked out of the air to deal with this. I mean, there's one of the later books, I believe Dumbledore whispers a spell and Harry's falling from 100 feet up when the Dementors come to a Quidditch match, and he still is injured, but it slows him down somehow. I mean, is there a bounce charm? I mean, it just seems like there's some very, very easy fix to prevent this. And I always wondered if part of that is because, other than death, it seems like most of the injuries can be magicked away pretty quick by Madam Hooch, or what's the nurse's name? Pomfrey. Nurse Pomfrey. Yeah. She's able to fix about anything pretty quickly, although often people there overnight for observation after they've been healed in 10 seconds. So what happens to Neville here?
That's a good segue. So what's different in this world is that, Neville gets a broken wrist from this. And a broken wrist in our world is a very difficult thing to deal with, and something that would have a lot of medical bills and would require a pretty long and difficult recovery. And it would also, particularly if it happened to your dominant hand, be a really, really inconvenient thing in your life. And
even going to the restroom would be a problem then. So, I mean, it's a bad injury. But in this one, she wanders off. She leaves the class by themselves with a bunch of 11-year-old kids without any supervision, with their magic brooms that many of them have never even been on before, other than, I think, Malfoy. And she takes him off to the hospital wing where Madame Pomfrey, waves her wand and he's healed almost instantaneously. So does the school have negligence for this incident, you think?
Well, absolutely. I think there's two interesting parts of that. In the Muggle world, her decision to take him and leave the rest of the class would have been more reasonable, because that injury would have been particularly bad. And if you're weighing which thing is more dangerous, leaving the children and getting this dealt with or not, in the Muggle world, well, you need to get that dealt with immediately because it's a very serious injury. In her world, it's not something super serious. Probably it's something that they could wave a wand and fix. So the opportunity cost per se of leaving a bunch of children unattended is really a more foolish decision.
Well, I mean, like, they have a fully grown wizard like Madam Hooch they have ways of communicating other than just owls. They seem to mostly use these wild animals to deliver handwritten notes back and forth that are attached to their legs or whatever. But I mean, they have summoning charms. They have ways to levitate things. They have those howlers, which basically is a recording that you can send on an owl somehow. I mean, couldn't you have a non-screaming howler that you could say, Madame Pomfrey, can you come down here and get Neville so I don't have to leave all these children by themselves with the magic brooms?
And at the very least, lock up the brooms. She left them. We just saw what could happen to Neville even with supervision. Imagine what can happen to these kids without supervision in their first years. She's not leaving 16, 17-year-olds. She's leaving 11-year-olds.
Yeah, and I've got a 10 and a 12-year-old, and they don't always make the best decisions, and they don't even know magic. So you've got here essentially, Draco Malfoy instantly gets on the broom and they starts messing with Neville's Remember All, the little bauble that is supposed to help him remember things, and he ends up playing essentially keep away with Harry Potter and throws it. And Harry Potter, the first time he's ever been on a broom, is able to dive down from 50 feet away or so and catch it in his hand before it breaks on the ground.
So Madam Hooch is the one who did this, so Hogwarts wouldn't be responsible for this, right?
Well, Madam Hooch is an employee at Hogwarts as a professor. So, and somehow Professor McGonagall, I think, saw this happen, comes out. Harry thinks he's going to be expelled at that point. So if you're an employee of a place who causes injury through negligence to someone, there's a doctrine called respondeat superior, which essentially means the employer is going to be responsible for what the employee did. So, does Neville have a potential claim against Hogwarts for this? Probably. I mean, they may have tried to have him sign what's called a waiver, which any parent that's gone to a trampoline park or a water park, they often will have you sign those things. Well, in Tennessee, if you're under the age of 18, you can't legally contract for anything. So those waivers that you sign at those places are not enforceable on minors. At least in our state, they're not, and in other states as well.
Touching on the respondent superior for just a moment, it's a good principle because it allows companies not to just shirk off responsibility for what people do. There's a claim called negligent hiring, and if you hire someone who causes a type of damage that a decent background check would have told you that they were likely to cause, that you could be more on the hook for that. But it's particularly helpful. We don't know what Madam Hooch's financial situation is, but we can probably assume that Hogwarts has a pretty good financial situation, insurance policy thing. And so it's a good protection for people who are wronged.
So ultimately, Professor McGonagall comes out. Harry thinks he's going to be expelled from the school, but instead they end up putting him on the Quidditch team where he becomes the youngest seeker in nearly a century.
Yeah, I certainly, if I were Neville bringing the claim, wouldn't say that was the most responsible thing for Hogwarts to do, because basically he thought he was going to get expelled, and instead they reinforced his bad behavior by putting him in this position of stature that ends up being a theme for the rest of the book and movie.
So what are our damages here? I mean, they certainly are negligent in not putting precautions in, allowing this injury to happen. Neville has this sharp pain that appears to last for about 10 minutes.
His broken wrist isn't the same as a broken wrist in real life. In fact, his damages are really, really small. Like you said, he had a small period where it was probably pretty painful, but it healed up really quickly. It didn't probably cause him problems past that hour or two. Is the fact that could have caused him issues real relevant to the civil claim, or is it more about what actually happens?
Well, I mean, first thing I thought of with this was you essentially have one teacher teaching this relatively large group of kids how to fly. And I remember going through driver's ed as a kid in the summer. I mean, we at most would have two kids in a car with one instructor watching one person drive. And that's vastly safer than, flying up where you can go almost limitlessly into the sky and fall from it. They just have one teacher there observing all these people learning how to fly, which is ridiculous.
But as far as Neville, so I think we would agree with the elements of negligence. Hogwarts had a duty to do better than they did.
They definitely breached that duty, and that led to an injury that was caused, and then potentially could have led to many more injuries when they leave Harry and Draco there to do their shenanigans they're doing after the teacher leaves. They flew even more recklessly than what Neville had done. Neville's was an injury of inexperience. Harry was just a natural at it and was able to fly, and Draco clearly had flown a bunch before this. So ultimately, the big problem with this particular case is, what are your damages? You have the broken wrist that gets healed almost instantly within a few minutes. I don't know. This is probably not a case to pursue.
No, he presumably doesn't have any medical bills, or who knows? Maybe the magical. We talked earlier in this podcast about not really knowing the value of wizarding money. Maybe the magical spell has some sort of currency tied with it, and if there was a significant medical bill that eventually got put on Neville, then he would have a decent case. But outside of that, in terms of his pain and suffering, if there's no real significant medical bills there, his pain and suffering was pretty limited. I don't see this being much of the case.
Or significant lasting injury. It's not always just about medical bills, but we get lots of phone calls here at our law firm from people who don't have significant damages. They had something bad happen to them, but through luck or other things, they were not injured. They were not killed. The person calling in here saying they almost died, or their relative was almost injured. That's always unfortunate, and our hearts go out to them, but there's not a lot you can do with civil cases unless there's a significant injury.
Absolutely. And I'd rather get a call from someone stating that something really bad almost happened than someone who says that something really bad did happen. But as far as the value of your case, the ones that had something really bad did happen are unfortunately going to be much higher value cases.
So, I mean, had Neville been really injured, and it comes into facts that they essentially not only were negligent, but then doubled down on it and rewarded their own sloppy behavior by making Harry the Seeker, would be a good fact for the plaintiff in this case.
For sure. There's plenty, in terms of proving the case and proving negligence up to the point of damages, it's a fantastic case. The damages just aren't there. And all in all, for real life purposes, that's a good thing. For your legal case and for recovering lots of, I forgot what the currency, what was the currency?
Currency is mostly galleons, and
Galleons.
then there's there's smaller parts of that like Canute's sickles.
So, I'm pretty sure I read the entire series without knowing the proper pronunciation for Canute's, and I don't think it's ever mentioned in the movies. So I knew galleons, I knew sickles.
I have spent a healthy amount of time at the actual Hogwarts at Universal in Orlando, which is phenomenal.
It is great. We've actually been together. It was a fun time. Cold day.
We did escape from Gringotts and
Yeah,
ride Hagrid's motorbike ride.
Hagrid's motorbike was my favorite, and I think the frozen butterbeer, which is actually just caramel chocolate something.
It's just like cream soda with a little bit of butterscotch put on top. It's tasty.
It might be the best thing I've ever had. It might have the most sugar of anything.
I will say this: if you've not been to the Universal Harry Potter world, it's well worth your visit. It's awesome, and they're getting ready to open their third major Harry Potter portion of their park this summer in May. It's going to be a Ministry of Magic ride.
So I think naturally we've actually already started this. It's time for some irrelevant evidence. So what we're going to do, as we talked about shortly ago, this scene that we just talked about led to Harry Potter becoming the seeker on his Quidditch team. And his dad was a good Quidditch player, and Quidditch is the magical sport. It's the one they care about in the same way that Europeans go crazy for soccer and Canadians go crazy for hockey and Americans go crazy for football. Quidditch is the sport in the wizarding world.
Yeah, and I would ultimately say it was a sport that appears to have been developed by someone who doesn't know a lot about sports and is trying to put together a fun game based on not being particularly versed in what the world of sports is. The game itself it's fun how it's set up. You know, they have the beaters and the bludgers. You know, the bludgers are set up to where you're basically using large balls. They're a little misshapen, but you're trying to knock people off of their brooms at the great heights with this, you know, essential weapon during the game. And then you've got the quaffle you're trying to score through the rings during the match. And all during that, we've got our friend, the Golden Snitch over here. You're trying to have your seeker, which is Harry on his team, and another seeker on the other team. You're getting essentially 10 points, I think, for getting the quaffle in the rings. And then you get a massive amount of points for catching the Golden Snitch. And so whoever catches that one thing, it decides pretty much every match.
So the game of Quidditch kind of reminds me of something from my personal life a little bit. My close buddy Jared West always criticizes me when I set up the golf games because I have a million different things going on. And there's like 2 or 3 different things to win on each hole. And he's like, I don't have time for your reindeer games. Just tell me what I need to do. So in this game, you know, the objective that is happening most of the game is essentially you're trying to take a red ball called the quaffle and throw it into these hoops, and you get 10 points for every time you do that. And that's my first big criticism of this game. Everything is in intervals of 10s, and it just kind of drives me nuts with the fractions. That could be worth 1, and it would be the same difference. So, but if you score the quaffle, it's worth 10. As you talked about earlier, while that's going on, there's these magic-induced balls that are flying around, and they're basically trying to knock you off your broom, and we never really understand.
Well, no, they're thrown by the beaters, right?
The beaters are trying to knock them away.
They're
flying around magically, and the beaters are trying to basically play defense to allow the offensive players to not get hit by these bludgers. But if the bludgers hit you and you're at a significant height, presumably you're going to fall off your broom, and horrible injuries occur as a result of that. And that part's kind of confusing as well. But I like that feature of the game. I like that there's offense and defense, essentially. So my biggest criticism of the game is the overvaluing of the snitch. And she clearly does that as a plot device to make Harry the hero. He's essentially the quarterback. If he catches the snitch, his team almost always wins unless his team has literally given up 16 more quaffle scores than the other team, because
it seems nearly impossible if you're getting 150 points for that, and you don't ever know when it's going to come out. It could come out within 10 seconds of the match starting, or it could take. They act like these games can take hours and hours sometimes, but I don't know that we ever see any that do in any of the books. It doesn't make any sense.
In most sports, that's a good point. Most sports have a little bit of a time limit. You know, even baseball has gotten into a pitch clock recently. Cricket is maybe the sport she was most familiar with. and it sometimes can last a really long time because there's not necessarily a time period. But you're right. How do they know how long these games are going to last? You could catch the snitch within 3 minutes, and if it was like a really windy or rainy day and they couldn't see the snitch, this game could go on for so long that their health is in jeopardy.
Well, I think the way it's set up is very peculiar too. I mean, in England where this is basically going on, I mean, they have all kinds of different levels of soccer, and soccer at the highest level there, in the English Premier League, they play a ton of matches. I mean, it's 30 something games just within, I think it's 38
within the regular season. And then they
play the other 19 teams home and away, let alone the other dozens of games they're playing with the different tournaments and the Champions League and all the other things. So, I mean, they play 3 games a year and they're all in the same school. And so I've never really understood that part of it. You play, if you're Gryffindor, you play Slytherin once, you play Hufflepuff once, and you play Ravenclaw once, and that's your entire season. I mean, we have a world here that she's created where there is at least 3 different ways that I can think of that you can teleport instantly to anywhere in the world. But you've got the flu powder, on the network. You've got port keys. They're all taught by, I think, at the age of 17 to be able to teleport places.
I think it's to apparate.
Or to apparate, that's their term for it, but it's essentially teleportation where you just show up somewhere else. So, I mean, we know there's other schools of magic, in particular Beauxbaton and Durmstrang, that plays a prominent role in the 4th book. Durmstrang has one of the best players in the whole world on their team, and we're not going to play that other high school level team. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
For that matter, we know that Quidditch is big outside of just Hogwarts because there's the Quidditch World Cup that starts book 4, where you're talking about Victor Crumb is really prominent. To me, this game only works with aggregate scoring too. So what aggregate scoring means is it's not necessarily as much about winning and losing. It's keeping a year-long tally of the points. So let's say that you got a lot more quaffles than the other team and you were up 80-0, and then the other team caught the snitch. Well, you lost that game, but you only lost by 70, and you might be able to win the next game by 200. And really catch up in the standings. So
they do look at that. I mean, that's a plot point in the books. Like if they lose by this much, we still have a chance when they've lost matches. But the only playing 3 matches a year they play it like have a game like every 2 months and act like they're practicing 2 hours a day. I mean, what are we doing here?
That's the trouble with it, is aggregate scoring isn't super helpful if you only have 3 chances. But they practice all the time for these 3 games. They must be super nervous because they've only got a few times a year that they get to show off their skills and try to win. So
but there's supposedly these schools all over the place, of schools of magic. I mean, I feel like it would be like any other prominent private school where they would actually recruit, and have some better Quidditch players that you get from all over the place and give them a scholarship to come to Hogwarts. If you got some awesome beater that you want on your team that, you can get from a school that's not as highly ranked in that sport.
I mean, I think it's a travesty that she didn't talk to us about all this before she started writing.
I know.
Because we clearly have it very figured out.
We could be so helpful, at least with the sports aspect of it.
And our confidence is through the roof.
It is.
All told, she made a good try at it. The Quidditch scenes in the movies are probably some of my favorites. And I think
it's visually fun. I think the scoring and the setup is the issue.
Absolutely. And again, she doesn't hold herself out to be a massive sports fan. And at the time she wrote books 1, 2, and 3, she came from essentially nothing. She was writing a lot of it on a napkin. So hiring some sort of sports consultant was probably outside of her budget.
We were available, just saying. But no, I mean, we said this before. This woman is an absolute genius. And William and I have spent more time than we should admit debating the finer points of this, and frankly, just enjoying this great series. Williams likes the movies better than me. I'm excited to see what they can do with this, this series they're going to do, because I think the books beg for a longer view. I think the issue is always going to be, how do you make a child actor be the equivalent of, these spectacular adult actors they put in there, and that's a really hard thing.
I do overall agree with Matt that the books are better than the movies, but given the time constraints of the books, the movies are a nice review, and I want to dive back into this world.
Well, thank you all for listening to the Pop Culture Courtroom, and we'll see you next time.
The Pop Culture Courtroom is a Matt Hardin Law production.
If you've been involved in a car wreck or any other type of personal injury or wrongful death case, check us out at matthardinlaw.com or give us a call at 615-200-1111.